Welcome back. In this next lecture, we're going to get a little more control over how our blueprints work and how they operate. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the other event that we've already seen inside of our blueprint. So if I come over here and I've got my door selected and I click on Edit BP Door, I can edit the blueprint for a door and change the way that doors work. Right now, what we've told the computer is that doors are just objects that as soon as they begin playing, they print hello world to the screen as a string. Now that's not very door-like. That's not what doors do. Doors generally don't act until we're close enough to them in order to actually, perform some sort of action. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a trigger object. And so what a trigger is going to be is a trigger is going to be a way of designating a location in which we can check to see if another object overlaps this location. If the object does enter our location, it can then perform a task when we call this event actor begin overlap. So when I go to create my trigger is going to be a separate object other than my door. So I'm going to go ahead and exit back out into Unreal, and we're going to add a trigger to the world that's going to be able to do some functionality when we overlap or when we walk across it. To add a trigger to my scene, I'm going to come into my list of objects that I can quickly add to the project, and I'm going to add a basic object, and I'm going to add a trigger box. We'll see that this box here inside of the level is very much kind of just an empty outline with an icon that represents where it's at. And this is going to allow us to move this to wherever we want the interaction space to be. So I'm going to move this over my door. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change to my scale tool. And I'm going to scale my trigger to be a slightly larger area so that there's more room for us to run into it as we want to interact with this door. All right, so now that my trigger designates this area that I want to interact with, one thing that we'll notice is that as we interact with these objects, Unreal likes to scale things from the center of the object. So one of the easy ways to make sure that we're moving everything correctly is to make sure your object's center is in the right position and then begin scaling the object. That way, when it scales from both ends, you tend to get things the right size that you want them to be. Excellent. So now that I have a trigger that extends on each side of my door, I'm going to actually turn my trigger into a blueprint. So once again, we come down to this button. We click the button to convert the actor into a blueprint because right now that actor is just a trigger box. It's not a specific type. When I click to convert it, once again, it's a new subclass because we're going to start as a trigger box, but we're going to add additional functionality. And I'm going to call this BP for blueprint _ door. Now that I have my door trigger open in the editor, I can go to its event graph, and instead of using the begin play node, we can have something happen when we overlap that trigger. So I'm going to come off of actor begin overlap, and once again, I'm going to print string. Since this is a trigger that's going to open my door, I'm going to go ahead and write open sesame. And we're going to save and compile this script. And then we're going to give it a test inside the editor and see it in action. So when I press play, if you remember, my door printed hello world. And now I can move my character, and when I enter that trigger, now it says open sesame. I'll leave the trigger, I'll enter it again, and it says open sesame.